It is part 2 of Caroline Belsom's Effective Leadership Workshop, and today the topic is going to be records management. Caroline is an attorney who has led through the first virtual Aha Pae as chair of the conference council. So thank you, Caroline, for that. She was an assistant moderator for the UCC General Synod and has served on boards of nonprofits on Maui. And she is a member of Wailuku Union Church. And so without further ado, let's welcome Caroline Belsom.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you that were with us on, was it Wednesday? Gosh, everything's going crazy. Thursday. Welcome back. And for those of you that are joining us this morning, I do encourage you to go back and look at the first part of our workshop, because we talked generally about expectations, and what we're going through today, as well as what we did the other day, is to look at that in the context of meetings, conducting meetings at the last workshop, and today on records management. So we're talking about church records and meeting expectations that people may have. To begin this part of the workshop, I'm going to give you 2 hypothetical situations to think about during the course of the presentation. These are hypotheticals based on actual situations that I have encountered with churches in the last year alone. Hypothetical number 1, you are the moderator of ABC Church. Yesterday, you got a call from someone who has attended your church for the past few years. She is requesting copies of the minutes of your church council's meetings for the years 2011 through 2012. What is your response to the caller? Okay, that's hypothetical number 1, where you get a call from someone in the church that wants to look at records. Hypothetical number 2. Once again, you're the moderator of ABC Church. This time, a process server has handed the office administrator a subpoena for the custodian of records of ABC Church to appear at the court reporter's office on March 1, 2021 for a records deposition. This is a quote, records deposition, and to bring with him or her the records requested on the attached Exhibit A. Now, Exhibit A contains 15 categories of documents. I'm just going to read you a couple of those, or a few of those. Starts off by saying any and all documents, electronic stored information, and things relating to or concerning the subject lawsuit, including but not limited to the following. Number 1, copies of each and every report or notice of injury, claim, or incident occurring on February 6, 2016 at the ABC Church campus and received by ABC Church. Number 2, copies of any report identifying any investigation done by ABC Church into each and every report or notice of injury, claim, or incident occurring on February 6, 2016 at the ABC Church campus and received or conducted by ABC Church. It's also asking for copies of any document which lists the names of any ABC Church employees and or volunteers who supervised, tended, or maintained, operated, or otherwise assisted during the event on the ABC Church campus on February 6, 2016. And another one says copies of any photographs, still and moving, taken during the event on the ABC Church campus on February 6, 2016. And there are all the rest of those in Exhibit A that are being requested. How do you, as the moderator, and how does the church respond to the subpoena? We are going to go through these hypotheticals at the end of the session. I'll also take questions at the end of the session. There are also handouts for this session that will be posted on the conference website after the workshop. Okay, on today's agenda, we're going to be looking at trying to answer several different questions. The first of which is why your church should maintain official church records. The second of those is what documents or things constitute the official church records. We'll follow that with the next question of how, when, and by whom the records are generated. And then we'll go into where and how records must be kept. And finally, we're going to talk about who should maintain the records. Okay, let's start with the why. Why keep official church records? I will tell you that the most important reason is because the law requires it. All of our churches are governed by the Nonprofit Corporation Statute, which is Hawaii Revised Statute Section 414D. In particular, on records, that's in the subsection beginning with 301. I have copies of the laws that we'll be talking about as part of your handouts, so you can refer to them later once you pick them up off the website. So state law requires a church to keep minutes of all meetings of members and also of their board or council. We have slightly different structures, governing structures of our different churches. So some of you call them boards, some of you call them councils. You also need to keep records of all the actions taken by your members or your directors and trustees if you did not have a meeting. And some of your bylaws do allow meetings and votes to take place without a meeting. Those records of the actions taken should be also part of your records. All actions taken by committees of the board and council. All accounting records, including financial statements. All membership records, including the members' names and addresses. All records, well, let's say, all the information about your directors or trustees or council, anyone that's holding office and in that position becomes an authorized representative of the church. Need those informations for the particular year that they served and the position that they served and the extent of their terms. A few more your articles of incorporation. Some of you are old enough, you have charters instead of articles of incorporation. So this would also include your charters. Any amendments to either the charter or the articles of incorporation. Your bylaws, in some instances, you all might have done some major changes, and so you have what's called restated bylaws. Those will be part of your official church records. And any amendments to either the bylaws or the restated bylaws. All resolutions that have been adopted by the board that relate to membership qualifications and the rights of members must be kept as part of your church records. And finally, all of your annual reports to the DCCA. Now, I think there'll be some of you that say, what the heck is the DCCA? The letters stand for Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. It is a state agency. It regulates the registration and identification of corporations and bodies as officially able to do business in the state of Hawaii. All of your churches should be registered with the DCCA. If you're not, give me a call because we need to do something about that. You can also check to see whether your church is properly registered with the DCCA and whether your registration is current by going onto the website for the DCCA. We can help you get there if need be. Okay, the same state law allows members of your church to inspect and to copy certain records, okay? It also will allow directors and trustees to inspect and copy certain types of records as well. Some of those overlap and may not. But the process by which they go about doing that is something that the church controls. Okay, next. What are official church records? So let's talk about them. Generally speaking, official church records are items that speak for and can bind the church, can hold the church responsible in a particular way. These may be items that are created by church authorized persons or governing bodies. So if you are the moderator and you take some action, you encounter someone, have a conversation, sign something in your capacity as the moderator of the church, you are binding the church by your action. And those documents become official church records, and they will go into the file for your church records, not your personal files. Okay. Also, we're looking at items that are generated by third parties and addressed to the church or to the pastor in the pastor's capacity as the spiritual leader of the church, to any of the lay leadership. So your moderator or your officers or your trustees or your directors, whatever they may be called. When third parties send you something, that is actually something that belongs to the church, okay? And it could be generated and addressed to any other authorized representative of the church. If it's sent to the choir director in that person's capacity as the choir director of your church, that's a church record, okay? And a special note, just so that you keep it in mind, records can exist in a variety of formats. It used to be we just worried about paper. Now in this computer and technological age, we're looking at things that are kept digitally and also multimedia. We will be, or you will be seeing a handout that I have given to Lori to post, which lists the different kinds of records by category. It's a whole sheet long, and that's by category. Okay, and so look out for those. I'm also giving you a handout that will show records with their retention periods, the suggested retention period. Well, most of them are suggested based on what I would say the government officials or organizations have decided what were best practices. So look for those two handouts as we go through this. Okay, let's look at how records are generated again. Okay, whenever the membership or any of its governing ministerial bodies does one of the following. Okay, the first is takes action, either with at a meeting or by a vote taken without a meeting. That could be by email, that could be by telephone call, but there needs to be, or there should be a written record of that, the action being taken. I also recommend that if you take action without a meeting, that the next time that body meets, that one of the things that it does is to ratify the vote that was taken without a meeting, or whether it was taken by email or by phone. And then it will become part of the minutes of that in-person meeting. So that's one way to take care of those actions taken without meeting. Okay, another way that you can generate records is whenever there is communication between the church and third parties. It doesn't matter who the third parties are, but if you are sending something out to third parties, or if you are receiving something from a third party, that's official church records. It's church correspondence. Okay, another way that this can happen is when agreements or contracts are executed between the church and someone else. Those records will or should always be, or those agreements and contracts in particular should always be written in the name of the church, even though we need a body, a person to sign off, and that should be one that's authorized. So check your bylaws to see who's authorized to sign your agreements and contracts, but those then will generate another set of church records. One other thing, be sure they're dated. Oftentimes we get in there and we sign something and we don't put a date on it, and there's no date anywhere else in the contract, but that will help us in our record system later. Okay, in this case, we're also generating some records if we conduct a sacrament that affects membership. Generally would be something like baptism, someone joining the church, or the installation, or I forget what all they're called, but those kinds of things affecting the membership, which in turn then affects the rights of that person. So anytime you have a sacrament, make sure you have a way of keeping a track of that record. Okay, we also will generate records when we receive reports from our governing officers or any of our committees on them. And lastly, if we acquire or dispose of any church assets or any church debt, or take any kind of physical action, you'll be generating some form of church record. All of the stuff that gets generated will then need to be handled and stored and tracked somehow. So let's talk about where and how church records should be kept. According to the Hawaii Revised Statutes, there are certain records that must be kept at the principal office of the church. So there may be a few churches that will say, we don't have a principal office. We just have the sanctuary. We just have the church. It is actually looking for that office address that has been listed with the DCCA as the principal office of your church. It should be, for best practices, the location of the church itself. So there may be, one suggestion is that there may be a possibility of putting some file cabinets in the pastor's office that will be not the pastor's files, but it will be the church files. And they will then be meeting the law requirement of being kept at the principal office of the church. And when you look at the statutes, you'll see which particular records must be kept at the principal office of the church. And it will also tell you for how long you need to keep them there before you move them to offsite storage, which is the next bullet point. Other records may be kept at the principal office or at a secure offsite storage facility. We'll talk about that secure part of it. But in order to meet this section, one of the best ways to do it is to just rent storage space, a small storage space that will fit file cabinets for which you can put your files. I'm not sure Auntie Sally's garage is going to be was going to qualify as secure offsite storage, as a secure offsite storage facility. It might, but you're going to have to show that that's what it is if you were questioned about it. Okay. When you are working with your current records, you should be keeping those current records by topic in a file cabinet. Now, the file cabinet should definitely be a secured file cabinet if you're working with confidential records, which generally will be your personnel files. And for some people, parts of their financial files may be considered confidential. Check your bylaws. It may include a definition of what confidential records for the purposes of your church may be. But for current records, keep them by topic in a file cabinet. Next bullet point. If they're historical records, we're going to store them by year. in boxes that are designed for storage, and you must keep them. This is part of the statute. You must keep those records not only by year, but keep them as they were originally kept in the file cabinet as current records. So as you remove them, make sure that you are replacing them in your storage box in the same order, in the same way. Now you can clean out some of the files for things that are duplicates or things that are drafts that were finalized and then sent, but the drafts are still in the file. You can pull those out. But generally speaking, you're just going to pull your file folder out from your current files and put them into your storage boxes. When the storage box is full, label it as the year that it covers and what it's included, and then send them off to storage. Okay, we're moving on to who will maintain the files or the records for the church. And so it depends what kind of records there are. For current records, one person generally is who is required to have that job of maintaining the current records. It should be in their job description that this is what they do. They need to timely collect and maintain specific records, and in your job description, you can identify what those records are. Timely collecting them means that within a reasonable time, let's say within a week after the meeting occurs, lean on those people who are keeping the minutes to pass them on to you, or at least keep touching base with them to say, okay, have you finished your meeting? Let me put them in the files and make sure that they come in that way and we aren't missing any records as a result. So by the time the next meeting comes along, they'll be taking minutes for that, and they may not remember to send you the one before. So it's that person's job to sort of keep up with what's being generated and make sure copies get into the current records. If we're looking at historical records, generally this is a job that can be done by one person, but I suggest that you have more than one person. You can have a group of people that will work together to also collect documents that are missing. So as they're putting away the historical files, they'll go through that year and they'll check to see how the records were kept. And then they'll see if there are any pukas here where we're missing the set of, let's say the set of minutes from the first quarter of a particular year, and then they go chasing them down. So when you have more than one person, you can figure out amongst you who's going to be responsible for what, or everybody's responsible for the same thing, but you rotate it through there. But it doesn't become a burden on anyone in particular. This group can also set a time, like once a quarter, when they'll meet, let's say on a Saturday afternoon, and just look at what's come in, and then they're going to together put them away in the closed storage so they all know where this new group of records are going to go, and then they can talk amongst themselves as to what they need to be catching up on to make sure that the set of records is complete. So their primary responsibility is to collect, generally from the current records section, but to collect, maintain, and then they're also the ones that are going to be responsible for then destroying the historical records when the retention period expires. I know some of you were saying, oh, we're going to have to get a bigger and bigger storage. Nope, there are endpoints for keeping records, after which if someone comes looking for them and you don't have them, there's not liability on your part because you followed your retention records and disposed of them as their time came on the calendar. The duties of each of these, of either the current records person or the person or persons responsible for historical records, will be based on church policy as to how they will receive and classify and and file their records. In this case, the duties will also ensure that the records are complete and timely filed. So it might outline in the policy what needs to go into the files and within what period of time. And lastly, I think there's one more, two more. Prepare records for storage, and then do a regular review of the files for purging. This is the destroying of the records. Generally, what you can do in that respect is, as the files come in and you get them ready for storage, you're indicating the year that those files pertain to, generally what the contents are. You can also put on the label for the box the destroy date. So destroy in, third quarter of 2023 or what. That way, when you're going to review and purge files, you just look for the boxes for that quarter, pull them out, flip through them, make sure that they're complete. They do match what is on the label for the box, and then you're ready to send them to wherever you're going to dispose of them. If they're confidential files, they should be shredded. Otherwise, they can just be sent out to the trash. But make some arrangements on that. Okay, let's move on. One of the best ways to deal with your records and the handling of those records, the generation and handling of them, is to have a records management policy, which we'll call the RMP. And with that records management policy as a foundation, you can then establish a records management system. When you have this system and you have it posted, or you have a copy available in the church office, right on the desk, or where people come in and all, it will always be available if someone has questions about particular records. And you can, they can check through the policy, they can check through the procedures written out in the management system. Okay, so the policy is the foundation for the system. The board or the council, whichever governing body has a responsibility for dealing with policies, should officially adopt them and implement them to ensure you are meeting the legal requirements, and also that you're being consistent in your management. The records management policy guides the actions of the church, that is the governing bodies as well as the membership, in using historical or being able to even research historical information about church management and practices. Now, in a meeting, I often hear people say, well, we've been doing this for the last 10 years. And if I go back in the records and I check, I find, oh, no, they've only been doing it for the last 3 years. So I can bring that out to them and say, I've checked to see that we're consistent, and we have been doing this for the last 10 years. But it seems to me that at least beyond 3 years, you were really doing it this other way. And so having those records available helps the governance of your church as well. The last point is that the policy can prevent actions by the church that are inconsistent with its rules or its regulations or its policies or its practices. And one of the ways to remember that this is a benefit for having a policy is that if you take these actions that are inconsistent with your rules or regulations, your bylaws, your policies, whatever, you are being exposed to some liability from someone for something. So be careful and let your records help you rather than hinder you. Looking at the records management system, okay, it should identify the records that you're going to be keeping, and then you can also compare that with what the statute has said you should be keeping. The system will also designate the responsible persons and or group for each set of records, and includes the job description or duties for the position of that person. Third, under this system, it will authorize offsite storage facilities for historical records. It's usually in general terms, which says that the church will maintain an offsite storage system, facility within 5 miles of the church, and it will be accessible to, and then it will list the positions, the officers perhaps, or the moderator, or there may be your steward of records, whatever it may be. It will state the procedures for access to that offsite storage facility, how things will be reviewed, marked, and destroyed once records are at the offsite storage facility. Fourth, last one on this slide, the system will include a process for requesting and approving the review of records. Okay, you will find in the statute that members are allowed to view the records. On the other hand, your bylaws are where the definition of a member comes in. Some bylaws that I've looked at distinguish between active members and not inactive members. The active members have certain rights. The inactive members have certain rights. Actually, the active members have more rights than the inactive members. But the definition becomes important when you're looking at who's requesting to look at the documents and what documents they may be entitled to look at. So there needs to be a process for handling those requests. Like our first hypothetical that we talked about, you have a caller coming in, the caller's attended church over the last few years. Those kinds of things are the beginning of the process. Anyone may request records. It's like anyone can file a lawsuit. You can't stop them from doing that, the filing itself or the requesting. But your response based on your policy and your records management system processes and procedures will dictate what you respond and how you respond, okay? So it'll state the proper procedure for reviewing the request and then responding to the request. So in this case, your policy should include the following: a description of the persons entitled to review and or copy records. Sometimes they may be allowed to review the records, but not take copies. Other times they may be allowed to review records. In most cases, I suggest that you do the copying and you charge them for the copies. And you keep track of what you copied and gave them and when you gave them those, okay? Also, your policy in the next step will have a request form. It will include a blank form. The request form will be completed and signed by the person making the request. You will get contact information from that person. You'll get a description of the documents and the time period that they're looking for. Make sure that they're specific. In the law, we talked about burdensome. If someone is asking to look at all of the church records from 2013, that's a lot of records. And it would be burdensome on the church to produce those or to give those out. So we can object to them, or we can limit the scope of what they're entitled to look at any given time, and sort of push them to being more specific. Do you want to look at the financial records? Are you really interested in just the minutes of the meetings? Whatever, okay? They should also provide a reason for their request. And you'll see in the state statute that for particular documents, a reason for the request is required. And so I encourage people to have a request form that includes a section for them, for the requesting person to provide the reason for their request. I will include, or have included in the handouts, a sample request form that I used with one of our churches, and that seemed to help them focus in. It was based on the fact that they did have a section in their bylaws that provided for, or that addressed records and books of the church in terms of how they would be available for review and all. The form should state any limits on the document's use and require an agreement by the requesting party to pay any copy costs. And if you're charging them the same as what the outside commercial entities are charging, I think Office Depot charges like 12 or 15 cents a copy or so. That seems to be reasonable. You can charge them less if you want. In any event, that request form is very, very important. The statute says that in most instances, the request should be in writing. And so some churches have just said, okay, put it in writing. It doesn't help the church. If all you have is somebody giving you a note that says, please pull all the files for 2011 that pertain to our finances or pertain to the budget, and then they sign their name. Okay, you want to make sure that you know why they're requesting, that it's a fair and reasonable request. Okay, next. The request review process, that is, once you receive the request, what happens? I like to say that you give that request to your team, what I would call the records management team, whoever's handling that, to look over to see if they've filled everything in properly. And then you look at what they filled in to see if that meets that's consistent with the mission of the church and a nonprofit organization and the statute. If you're not sure, call your attorney, your church attorney, or if you don't have one that's usually helping you, but you have one as a member of your church, ask them to look over or consult with them as to your concerns, and then move from there to respond. Okay, and your policy and process should have an approval criteria present and available for everyone to see what you'll be applying, what standards in reviewing these requests. Then you should notify the requesting party once you've come to a decision about the request. Are you going to approve the request or deny the request? If you approve the request, what are the terms? Generally speaking, when you approve the request, you are letting them know it's okay. You will pull out the documents. The further back the documents are, the older they are, the more inaccessible they might be. That is, they're in offsite storage, or you had a lot of records generated that year. So the longer period of time you should give yourself to when you have those records available. But in the notification, let them know when the records will be available. Have them come to the church office in a meeting room, or if you don't have a church office, have them come to the sanctuary. Have the records that they've requested available for them to review, and also have a packet of Post-its. Have them mark what it is that they want to have copied. And then at that point, we can, if there's a lot to copy, send it out for copying. If it's a few pieces of paper so that office staff can do it, have the office staff copy it, keep track of how many copies they made. Put it all together and then tell them you'll notify them when the copies are ready. And before you hand them the copies, make sure you have kept a record somehow of what you've given them and when they picked up those copies. The church representative who will research and respond to the request and keep a record, should keep a record of the request and the response and we should have that church representative's name. Now, if it's current records, usually it will be that one person who maintains the current church records. If it's historical records, someone from your records management team may be the one who researches and responds to the request. And if you have several people, they may rotate and say one person's responsible for this quarter or this 6 months and another this 6 months. But somehow you work it out. So one person will be, unless it's a huge request, but one person will be researching, responding, and writing a response to the requesting party. Okay, so let me just review what handouts you're going to be seeing on the website. Okay, Hawaii Revised Statute section, this in chapter 414D, which is a nonprofit organization statute, starting with section 301 to actually 306. I've left off 304 because it's not really applicable to our situation, but the others are, and you'll get copies of those. So don't panic if you don't see 304, it's just not applicable. Okay, another handout that you will be seeing is a sample bylaw section called Books and Records, which one of my clients, one of my churches has actually included in their bylaws, which I thought was helpful to describe how the process will go, and that they have a system. And you'll also receive another handout, which is a list of the church records that you should be keeping by category. Now, you may not be generating some of those, but a lot of them you will be. So you'll at least be able to identify them. The next handout after that will be the showing the records and their retention periods. And then the last one I think we have on there is a sample request form. Okay, we can take some, well, we can do one of two. We can start with questions, or if you want to start with the hypotheticals, we can start with the hypotheticals. Any preference? Oh, I love hypotheticals. So I'm going to start with them just because people are chomping at the bit to know what happened. Okay, the first hypothetical we looked at was a telephone call. Okay, and the telephone call was from someone who had attended the church over the last few years, was still attending the church, but now wants copies of minutes of the church council's meetings for the years 2011 to 2012. Okay, call comes into the moderator. You're the moderator. Your response should be, I need to refer this request to our records management team, and they will contact you, or someone from the team will contact you. You give the request. Now, this one came over the phone, so it's your handwritten notes, and all you're saying is council meeting minutes from 2011 through 2012. You give that to the team, and they will check the policy and make sure that they can give out, or they can have someone look at those, which in most instances they can. They'll also need to check the bylaws as to who gets to look at them. The interesting part about this particular situation, the real situation, was that the person calling had been a member of the church at one time and got mad at the church, so cut off their membership, but continued coming to Sunday service on there. And thought because of that, because she was still coming to church, she would be entitled to see those records. In their bylaws for the particular church involved here, they limited access to their records to active members, and this person was not an active member. So they, in that case, had to send a letter to her that explained everything. I'll read you a portion of that letter as well. The other is that the request had, under the policy, had to be in writing. And so she was told that as well. And then the reply, the team then put a reply together. So let me read you real quickly what it was. So, dear so-and-so, this letter is written in response to your recent request to view the minutes of the ABC Church Council meetings for the years 2011 to 2012. The church is aware that state law provides that members of the church may inspect and copy certain church records. Our membership records show that you were a member from October 2013 until March 2018. Thus, you are currently not a member of our church and are not entitled to review the church records. Moreover, you have requested records of meetings that occurred more than 3 years ago. Such records are subject to additional requirements under Hawaii Revised Statutes 414D-302. Now, we had put this in there because even though she was not a member, her husband was a member, and we thought she might then try to backdoor through the husband. So if she was going to do this, here's what they needed to do. The request must be in writing and submitted at least 5 business days before the date you wish to inspect the records. Number 2, the member's demand is made in good faith and for a proper purpose. Number 3, the member describes with reasonable particularity the purpose and the records the member desires to inspect. And 4, the records are directly connected to this purpose. So for all of the foregoing reasons and upon consulting legal counsel, ABC Church hereby declines to allow you to inspect the requested records. So that's what happened in the real scenario. I know from experience in dealing with some churches that when the call comes in, whether it's to the moderator or the office administrator or whoever is there to take the call, they used to, okay, we'll get those ready for you, and and they don't pay any attention to a policy if there even was one. But that inconsistency then might get you in trouble down the road, because someone else will call and ask for records and say, we can't do it for this reason, this. They will, but you gave so-and-so the records, and then, it goes on and on. So, and they did not at the time have a records management policy. This group is currently working on one. In the second hypothetical, this was a subpoena for records. And what you might want to know is there was an event on the church campus on that day. It was not sponsored by the church. It was a rented out facility for another group to use. And the church, at least what they tell me, is the church didn't know that an accident had occurred. No one through the holders of the event had said anything to the church once the event was done. Subsequently, those injuries were serious enough and there was a lawsuit. And as part of the lawsuit, this request, the subpoena came in. The subpoena is a court order. It is a particular type of document that could subject the church to some exposure for liability if they don't respond. I would say anytime you get a subpoena for records, call your attorney, send them a copy of the subpoena, and let them help you work through it. If you have put in place a records policy, make sure that your attorney has a copy of that policy, has a copy of your bylaws, and can then check to see whether you can, or not whether, but how you can respond to the subpoena. So if whoever's in the office, and in particular, the way that the process servers work with an organization is they can serve anyone that is at the premises listed as the principal office of the church. So you need to instruct your office people, however many you have, or if it's just the pastor, remind the pastor that when they accept service, which they don't have a choice, they will do, that they should immediately notify your council chair or your board chair, and that person can then notify your legal counsel. But that needs to be dealt with. There's usually a time limit because it will state a particular time that they have to show up at the court reporter's office with the documents. They will be sworn under oath to say they are the custodian of records and that these are the records in response to what's being asked for. So send it to the records management team, let them look it over, and then give a preliminary response about whether they have documents or don't have documents. They should research the existence and location of the records, excuse me, within the subject time frame. They should pull all of those records relating to the specific event, organize the records according to the requests. So in response to request number 1, these are the documents. In response to request number 2, we don't have any documents. In response to request number 3, we have these documents, and on and on. Make copies of the documents, and then whoever is designated as the custodian of records is the one that will take those documents at the time of the deposition and show up at the court reporter's office. Get sworn in to tell the truth. Usually the questions are you the custodian of records for ABC Church? Yes, I am. Have you received the subpoena from whatever date or whatever? Yes, I have. Have you collected those records and brought them with you today? Yes, I have. Are you turning over all of the records that have been requested under the subpoena? Yes, I have. Turn them over and you leave. Okay, but we run into problems at the get-go because people have records in 5 different places and they have to all be searched. We run into problems because they didn't keep certain records, because nobody knew what that was all about. So catch your breath, get your policy together, and try to anticipate the kinds of situations that might come up. So those are the 2 hypotheticals, and at least what might happen, could happen. These are, as I said, based on some real situations that I've worked with churches on. Questions?
Caroline, it looks like you did such a thorough and good job in your presentation. So far, we don't have any questions, but maybe people are getting ready to put some in the chat. So we'll wait a little bit and see.
Okay, that's fine. There's always 2 sides to the coin there. So I might have done a really thorough and good job, but I also might have confused them so thoroughly they don't even know where to start to ask questions.
So I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question. Do you need to turn over the whole document, like for example, minutes, or can you redact some of the information that doesn't apply?
Okay, let me ask. You should be redacting any personal confidential information that shouldn't be out there from the minutes. But if they're asked, unless you channel them to be very specific, and sometimes the request may come in to say, I would like to review all of the minutes from the year 2011 that pertain to, and they give you the subject. So then you look through all those just that year, and you look which ones have that subject in it. And then you have to, in that case, you would be showing them the entire document. If they said that they're looking for documents that contain that information or that portion of documents that contain the information, then you can block out everything else except that information. So you can, in their request, you can have them refine their request if it comes in too broad. So if they just ask for the minutes, then you can say, is there a particular topic? And you narrow it down and narrow it down. So once they give you the topic, then you can say, we'll produce the records that refer to that topic, but we're going to redact everything else around it. And usually they don't have a problem with that. So you, in the case of the minutes, you would need to make sure that you still have the date, you still have who was present during that time, and then the section that would pertain to their request. One other thing to keep in mind is sometimes people don't know what they want. They're really fishing. So it's really your job to, or the records management team's job to force them to think about what it is that they're looking for, or give you not a broad request, but a much narrower one, as much as possible. It'll help you, but it also helps the church to just keep people focused there.
Carolyn, I have a comment.
Sure.
Yeah. When a church gets a subpoena, I would imagine that most of the time it doesn't end in any kind of demand. But to be careful, a church should also call insurance agent, and we should report an incident of that subpoena and just mark it that we were notified. And should there be a future demand for compensation or whatever, then it's on record, just to be on the safe side.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great point.
A lot of times, if a subpoena or any kind of incident that appears that somebody could become a plaintiff, you really want to let your insurance agent know, because the church might be doing actions or whatever that would actually hurt their case. So if there's an incident like that, usually we report it, and then the insurance carrier can decide at that moment whether it wants to step in, hire its own legal counsel, and assist the church in the process. That's what I would suggest.
I think it's a good suggestion. It somewhat depends on the case, but most of the time when they're, and you can tell from the request, but when it's looking at personal injury, and it's coming at the church from the point of view that it's church property, then it should send some red flags that say, uh-oh, you know, they might be looking at the church for a portion of the liability. Yes, by all means. And that's the other reason we keep a copy of what it is that we gave to, or I'll keep a note of what it is that we gave over to that other side, because I would also send to the carrier, or at least let them know that you have a copy of the set of documents that you gave in response to this subpoena, and your insurance carrier can then let you know whether they wish to see it or not.
Usually we send in the copy of any kind of legal request right away to the carrier, and then the church has done its job. You know, that you, I think you should do that. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Caroline, our next question is from Janice. Is it okay to digitize historic old records?
Yes, you can digitize them. They're still subject to subpoena. And so what you would be doing is you would actually, from my point of view, once you digitize them, you have a record that you can just go and search electronically, which makes it a lot easier than having someone sit there and go through all the boxes to look for what you're looking for. I would say, if the church can afford it, there are companies that digitize, that do the digitizing of records. The conference office did theirs, and the foundation did theirs not too long ago. But it's expensive too. Sometimes you might think of putting that as a service project for someone. Just be careful what it is that you give to them. If it's the youth group, you know, the instructions have to be very specific. I would not give to them to copy anything that has confidential information in it. Not that I don't trust them, but they're not always as focused on the task as they should be. You don't want the production of documents to come back to bite you later on something appears in your records that wasn't turned over to them just because it wasn't copied properly. Okay. And you're always given copies. Keep your originals as part of your files. Never give originals out in response.
Okay, hi Caroline. Good morning, everyone. Question from Evie. Who are usually a part of the records team, and what kind of training does the records team need?
Okay, you really don't need any specialized training. You need a lot of patience. You need to know where things are being kept. You need to be familiar with your records management policy, as well as the procedures that go on. But there isn't any special experience or background required. If you need to go through a training process, I can help you develop the training process, and someone can be the trainer. And once you get a group started for your records management team, when someone goes off and you need to fill that position, either the person going off or the remaining people can serve as trainers for them, and they should go through a training process at that point.
We have another question. What are some examples of historical records?
Okay, let me see if I can. Might be easier for me to, okay. All kinds of thoughts are running through my mind. The older the church is, the more records you're going to have if you haven't purged any of them. So check the retention schedule, you may be able to purge some of them. But however old your church is, you are going to have your governing documents like your charter, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. Those will be part of your historical and current records because all the amendments have been coming in. Generally speaking, in the principal office, you'll be keeping as current documents anything that's within the 3-year period back 3 years. From now on, back 3 years. Anything else can go to offsite storage, but you are required to have certain things at the principal office for that particular period of time. So check the statute, it will tell you what should be there. Anything else I'm calling as historical records, and they will be in the offsite storage. Okay. I'm looking at the records by category handout. You have one category is government regulated documents. So that's your business registration, your annual filings, your federal tax registration with the EIN number, your federal tax exemption determination letter, your state tax registration. If you were formed as a church and registered with the state back in 1955, that's historical record, but it's still got to be part of your current record as well. Some churches will have 2 sets of those particular significant documents. They keep one always in the principal office. They also put one back in the file in the year in which they got it. And that way they can always find, someone can find it, either by the date or the fact that it's significant and it's in the office.
When
Dorothy.
people are allowed to review your records, can they take pictures of certain pages?
I would say not, because you lose control over some of that. So I would find a way to very gracefully and gently say, no pictures allowed. If you wish copies, we will make the copies for you. And then you can keep track of what you are making copies of and turning over to them. It's just part of the policy. You know, you smile and you say, oh, thank you for asking. That was so nice of you. But our policy says that no cameras, no pictures, we will produce the copies for you. Say with a smile. That's all these expectation things we've been talking about and managing expectations.
There's a question from Kimberly. It states, What is the limit on detention of the minutes? I'm not sure if that's correct.
She may mean
Retention.
retention, how long we hang on to them, yeah. And there'll be a handout. It's really by the type of document that's there. The handout is entitled Retention Periods for Church Documents. For example, it may say certificates of insurance. You should keep those 7 years before you get, that's the recommended retention period. If you're looking at I-9 forms, this is pertaining to personnel records. It's I-9 forms after termination, you have to keep them at least 1 year after termination. So it depends on the type of document. The retention period will vary, and I'll give you that copy. We'll post it on the website.
We have another question. Somebody asked, I thought that the minutes of meetings of nonprofits are public record. Please say more about bylaws of action of the church council to limit who can access and see minutes and other records.
Talking about two things. One is nonprofits. What we're focusing on are nonprofits, the church category of nonprofits. The nonprofit organizations is a large category. It includes churches, but includes a number of other organizations, some of which are publicly funded. And in some of those instances, they will need to make their documents public, including their minutes of the meetings, in particular to members of the public who contribute to that organization, and the contribution constitutes membership as well. But the way the statute reads, it addresses members. So however you define members. Now, I was on the board of a nonprofit that's not a church. They had in their bylaws that they did not establish membership as such. They had a board, which was required, but no members term. People that contributed might get the status of honorary donor or something like that. But because they were not members, they were not entitled under our state 414B statute to automatically have copies of the minutes. So the situation will depend on the nonprofit, and also then the internal documents of the governing documents of the nonprofit. Churches will establish their memberships based within their bylaws, and a lot of them will have the procedure to become a member. You have to do X, Y, and Z, and you don't become an official member until you're actually you go through an acceptance ceremony or whatever that might be, and then they allow people to withdraw their membership if they wish. So one needs to check those.
And a question about insurance. Unfortunately, it came in before David left, but David had another meeting. But the question is, to David's point, if a church is allowing an outside group to use the facilities, wouldn't it be prudent to require event insurance to be named on the policy for the event?
Okay, I'm not, David's gone, and I can't respond from the insurance side, but I will tell you from the legal side, if you were my client and you were hosting someone on your the church campus for an event, I would highly recommend that you have them produce a certificate of insurance, which says that you have been added, or the church has been added as an additional insured for a particular event or particular period of time, just to cover all bases. David, is David coming back on?
To that question, that is the goal. The church really should require all its tenants, especially their long-term tenants, to have their own general liability policies and also name the church as additional insured. You know, that's pretty standard stuff. And along with that, I think a hold harmless clause might be helpful at times. But practically speaking, you will have groups that it's pretty impossible to get them to get insurance. I think a lot of the self-help groups fall in that category. And churches traditionally have just done that as part of their mission. But there definitely is exposure. The insurance board has what's called a TULIP program. It's a very kind of general liability policy that the church, through the insurance board, can request that its tenants pick that up at a modest cost. And if you're interested in that, certainly call our office and we'll let you know what that involves. Some churches actually do that now. And yeah, so that's a good suggestion.
Thank you, David.
Caroline,
Yes.
could I ask a question from the conference standpoint?
Oh,
I know
sure.
I know we're talking about local church records mainly, but I'm wondering if, let's say, we have a request for a fitness review file, somebody wants to look at it. Now, technically, that's a COM and that's associations, but should there be some kind of policy similar to requesting records, and should that be at the association level or should that be at the conference level or both?
I may have to turn to David for a little help on some of this. I'm not familiar with the review process and what the procedures are, but it sounds, if I'm going back to looking at just employment law and personnel actions, generally those are confidential unless there is some exigent circumstance we're needing to know that to produce those records. David, do you want to add anything to that?
That's what you said. There are certain confidentialities involved there. There are established protocols out of the national offices, particularly the what's it called? The legal office. There's a fancy name for it that I'm not thinking of at the top of my head. But it deals with, for fitness reviews records, they're never public. They're typically part of the conference office records, and the conference office records are not the same as association records. So that they're the, what's the term we're looking for? They are the property of the conference office. They are not the property of associations or local churches. And so that changes how those files are accessed and under what circumstances they are accessed.
Thank you, David.
If I may add that a fitness review is an ecclesiastical process. It is not an employment process. The employment agreement between a pastor is with that pastor's church, but the fitness review is an ecclesiastical process with the association or the conference. So of course, when the conference gets a subpoena for those types of records or a request to use those types of records, there are some additional First Amendment considerations that need to go into play in deciding to respond to those. So consult with your conference attorney.
Very good. Thanks, Andy. Yes, that's a great distinction to make to help us keep on track with what we're doing.
Any other questions for Caroline? That was very informative, and you see my records in the back.
Maybe you can get rid of some of those. Maybe some of those are historical and can go to offsite storage or be digitized and go somewhere else.
Yes, that's the plan. That's the plan. I do want to make a suggestion to our churches that you not use metal paper clips, because if you're going to put them into storage, eventually they're going to rust and it's going to be really hard to take off of paper. So want to suggest that you buy paper clips that are vinyl coated. They cost a little bit more than the regular clips, but in the long run, it's worth it because it won't rust and get stuck to your very important documents that you may need to eventually pull out of storage one day. So I want to thank Caroline very much for her presentation.
Thank you, everyone.